Hello class. Today we're going to talk about what's my expression. Okay, so let's kind of review what we've done so far. This is our standard that we're looking at right now. This is the same one that we've looked at for the last several days. It says we're going to be making conjectures from patterns. In other words, conjectures, what that basically means is we're making predictions. Okay, so we're looking at some data and making some predictions based on that. Now, the other day we talked about something called BBOA, which was the building blocks of algebra. And here's the standard that talks about why we do that. It says we're going to write an equation in the form of y equals mx plus b. We'll spend a lot of time talking about this today. Okay, to model a linear relationship between two quantities using verbal, which is the reading and writing expressions and the model. Numerical, which is we take our verbal and we translate it into an expression. Tabular, this is our t-chart, and then we graph it, a graphical representation. So let's talk about what we know about this t-chart. Okay, so that's what we're looking at today. So in order to be successful in this lesson, I need for you to be able to, when I give you a t-chart, you have to be able to tell me what expression created that t-chart. So let's look at what we have done. So we know that in this expression right here, we've got 3x minus 2. The first thing I'm going to do is change the subtraction to addition next to its opposite. And then I'm going to evaluate that. Because we know that this t-chart says if x is negative 2, then 3x plus negative 2 is what? So we would evaluate it. We would take our 3, multiply it by our negative 2, which is here, and then we would add 2 more negatives to it. So 3 times negative 2 gives me negative 6, plus negative 2 gives me negative 8. Okay, then we would do the next one because our x value now changes. So 3 times negative 1 plus negative 2. Well, 3 times negative 1 gives me negative 3 plus negative 2 gives me negative 5. Let's do one more with the work. 3 times 0 plus negative 2. Well, 3 times 0 is 0 plus negative 2 gives me negative 2. So what are we doing right here? We're increasing by 3. So my next one would be a 1 and my last one would be a 4. Now, my question is then, do you notice any consistent patterns on how the numbers are calculated? Do you notice anything about the patterns that are in this t-chart and the numbers in this expression? Okay, well, I'm hoping what you see right now is that right here we are increasing by 3 each time. Okay, so we're adding 3 each time. Well, there is a 3 in this expression right here. Okay, so I need you to kind of begin making the connection that I'm wondering, does that number and that number have anything to do with each other? Okay, then this negative 2. Okay, well, I've got a negative 2 here, but that really doesn't really have any bearing on it. But I have a negative 2 right here, which is kind of interesting. So this negative 2 and this negative 2, is there something connected to that? Okay, so let's look at another one and then continue looking at those patterns. Okay, so in this one right here, we'll do the same thing. So we're going to take this negative 2, plug it in. So 2 times negative 2 plus 4. Well, 2 times negative 2 gives me negative 4, plus positive 4 gives me 0. Okay, then I plug a negative 1. 2 times negative 1 plus 4. Well, 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, plus 4 gives me 2. Then 2 times 0 plus 4 gives me 4. So what is my pattern? What are we doing? We're increasing by 2, so the next one should be 6 and 8. So in that previous question, I asked you to start making a connection or see if there's a connection between this 3 and this pattern number. Did we have the same thing happen? Well, the pattern here is increase by 2, increase by 2, and look at there, there's a 2. Okay, now, I also asked you to look, did this negative 2 right here have anything to do with this negative 2 right here? Well, if you'll notice right here, I've got right there with that 0, I have a 4. I also have a 4. So, what I'm hoping you notice is that the pattern here is 2. That might have something to do with that. The number that's across from this 0 possibly may have something to do with that. So let's just see if that is the case. Okay, so let's take this one. Now, the first thing I'm going to do in this one, I'm going to change my minus to a plus next to its opposite. Now, if this holds true, if what we just looked at on those 2 previous slides holds true, this negative 2 is going to go right here by the 0. Okay? Now, this negative 2 then says I'm going to count by negative 2, which means I'm going to subtract 2 from it. Okay? Okay, so instead of adding 2 each time, I'm going to decrease by 2. Well, negative 2 decreased by 2 actually gives me negative 4. and then negative 6. And then if that were to hold true going back up, then I would increase by 2 to give me a 0 and a 2. So now what we're going to do is we're going to check this just to see. We're going to take one of my x values, we're going to plug it into this expression and see if we get this out of it. Okay, so I'm going to, since this is negative, I'm going to take a negative number because I want two negatives to turn into a positive. So I'm going to take this negative 2 here, multiply by negative 2, and then I'm going to add negative 2. So negative 2 times negative 2 gives me positive 4, plus negative 2 does give me a 2. So there are some patterns that are happening inside this T-chart that I need you to see. That one is the pattern on the right-hand side does connect to the pattern right here, okay, or pattern with this number right here. So here I am decreasing by 2. That number right there tells me I'm going to decrease by 2. This number right here, okay, it is always going to be associated with the x value of 0. It will always be the y value when x is 0. Because if I were to plug 0 into this negative 2x, I'm going to get 0 as an answer. Okay, so negative 2 times 0 gives me 0 plus negative 2. So that number will always go with that. Okay, so with that in mind, we need to learn what these things are called. Okay, and then we're going to run through a couple of examples, and then we'll be done with this lesson. Okay, so in this particular one, if we were looking at it, okay, what we would do is we would take this 4 and we'd plug it in right here at the 0. Okay, because that number right there has a special significance. On this page, in just a second, we'll learn what that number is called. Okay, this number in front of the x, well, we don't see 1, so if there's not 1, there's always a 1 there. So that means I'm going to count by 1. So here I've got 4, so to go to the next one, I'm going to increase by 1 to get a 5, then I'm going to increase by 1 to get a 6. Going backwards, I'll just decrease by 1 to get a 3 and a 2. Now, to check this, we pick some value other than the 0 to plug in to see if it works. So I'm going to take this 2. 1 times 2 gives me 2, plus 4, does that give me 6? Yes, it does, and it works every single time. And the reason why is it all goes back to that standard that we talked just a few moments ago. That standard that we had something to do with this y equals mx plus b. Well, this mx plus b is the form of our expression. Okay, so y equals mx plus b. And what's significant about that is that m is a thing that's called our slope. Okay, this slope here, it determines the steepness of our graph. Okay, the bigger the number, the steeper the graph. The smaller the number, the flatter the graph. Okay, this b is known as something called the Y-intercept. It's going to tell us where that graph is going to cross the y-axis. So this y-intercept is the y value when x is 0. So what we can do is we can now understand what these numbers in this expression represent and where they fit into this T-chart. So on this next slide, what I want us to be able to do is, if I give you the T-chart, can you give me back the expression? That's what we're looking for. So let's see if we can do that. So here's our first T-chart. The first thing I would like for you to look at is our y-intercept. Okay, what is the number what is the y value when x is 0? That's what our y-intercept is. So right here is where our y-intercept can be found. We look for the x value of 0. What is my y value across from that? And that is 1, so I would place a 1 right there. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to look at is what are my patterns? What's my pattern on the right? Well, my pattern on the right is increasing by 1. Now, I also need to look at what's my pattern on the left. Okay, and it's increasing by 1 as well. Because what we do to find this number, this m number, to find that slope, really, we do something called delta y divided by delta x. And what this delta stands for is the change in. So I need to know, in order to find this number, this slope right here, I need to take the pattern on the right-hand side, the change in the y, because this is our y side, divided by the change on the x side. So 1 divided by 1 gives me 1. So we have 1x plus 1 for this particular expression. So if I were to take any one of these x values and plug it in, I would get the y value out of it. So let's try that. And we'll take this 2. I'm going to plug it in. 1 times 2 gives me 2. Plus 1, does that give me 3? Yes, it does. So that expression works. So let's look at another one. What if I gave you this expression? Well, again, the first thing I want you to find is the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is the y value when x is 0. So I come down here, I look at this one. Here's my y value when x is 0. I put it in that spot. Now, in order to find my slope, I need to find the pattern on the right-hand side, which in this case is increasing by 2, and the pattern on the left side, which is increasing by 1. 2 divided by 1 is 2. So the expression that makes this t-chart is 2x plus 4. So let's try one and see. And we'll take this 2 and we'll plug it in. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 4 gives me 8. Excellent. Simple as that. Okay, let's try one that's a little bit tougher. Okay, what about this one? Well, again, we first look for what is our y value when x is 0, -2. So there is my y-intercept. Next, I find my delta y. What's my pattern on the right? Well, this time I'm actually decreasing by 4 because I'm going to the left on a number line. And over on the right, I'm increasing by 1. So -4 divided by +1 gives me -4. Now, if we were to try this one, I'm going to use a negative value this time. So -4 times -2 gives me -8. Gives me +8, sorry. +8. +8 plus -2 does give me 6. Works perfect. Okay, let's try one that's a little bit tougher this time. What if I didn't have a 0 value? What if I didn't have my x is equal to 0? Well, here's what you do. If we don't have the y-intercept immediately, then find the slope. Just find the slope first. Doesn't really matter which one of these numbers you find first. Okay, so I'm going to find my slope. So I look for my pattern on the right, +1. My pattern on the left, +1. 1 divided by 1 is 1. So now there are a couple ways of finding this value right here. Okay, one way is you just go find it. Okay, so you just work this right on back up. So here's 3, so the next one up would be 2, 1, and 0. Okay, so if I work this one up, I got to do the same thing for this one. Well, if I'm increasing by 1 going down, that means I'm decreasing by 1 going up. So this one's 3, 2, and 1. So my y-intercept value should be a 1. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. The second way is to use my points to help out. I already know my slope, so I know 1 times whatever x is. So I'm going to pick a point. We'll pick this point right here. So I'm going to plug in my 3 to where my x is. Plus what? Plus my b right here is going to be equal to my y value. So in this case, 4. So 3 times 1 is 3, plus what would give me 4? Well, 1 would be my answer, so I plug in my 1. So let's try another one like this. So what about this one? Now this one's a little bit further away to find my b value. So I'm going to use the plug-in method in order to do this one. So the first thing I find is my slope. I find my pattern on the right is increasing by 3. My pattern on the left is increasing by 1. 3 divided by 1 is 3. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick a point. I'm going to pick this point right here, this point of 10. I'm going to do 3 times, I'm going to use my x value, plus what will equal 21. Now, one of the things that's really kind of cool is I can actually go ahead and leave that as my b, because I know that's a b value, and solve this like an equation. 3 times 10 is 30, plus b is equal to 21. Now, how do I get that b by itself? I subtract 30 from both sides. So -30 plus 30 plus b is equal to 21 plus -30. So b is equal to -9. So that tells me my y-intercept is -9. So let's try one last one that's really kind of interesting, really kind of a tough one, and then we'll be ready for our assignment. So what about this one? This will be our last one for this particular lesson. Okay, so again, I don't see my 0 value, so I don't see my y-intercept. Okay, so this one, I could go find it. So let's see if we can. But let's look at our patterns first. So our pattern here on the right is actually decreasing by 4. And my pattern over here on my right is increasing by 3. Okay, so if I'm increasing by 3, just to go find the y-intercept, we just go up. So if I've got a pattern of 3, my next one would be 3 and 0. Over here, I'm decreasing by 4, so going back up, I'm going to increase by 4. So 2 plus 4 would give me 6, and then plus 4 again would give me 10. So that tells me this value is 10. But now, let's look at our slope. Okay, this value right here, which we know is going to be delta y, which is -4, divided by delta x, which is 3. Well, if you were to type that into the calculator, -4 divided by 3, that's going to give you -1.3333333333333. And you're not allowed to have that as a repeating decimal in this kind of an answer. So what we do, instead of treating this like a division problem, we just treat it like a fraction, and we end up with -4/3 x plus 10. So what we found out today is that in order to find an equation or find the expression that matches a t-chart, the first thing we attempt to do is we try to find our y-intercept. And we know that the y-intercept is going to be the x value, going to be the y value when x is 0. The y value when x is 0. Okay, we also know that to find this slope, that we're going to have the change on the right-hand side, the y side, divided by the change on the left-hand side. And that's the way we find the equation from a line, or the equation for a line, from a t-chart.